So in this session, we're going to talk about YouTube podcasting. And some of this is going to be very similar to podcasting regardless. There are some nuances to YouTube, and we're going to discuss some of those. And these are some things that you may already know about making sure that your podcast does build your USP. Your podcast needs to be or do something that people cannot get elsewhere. And that is probably the classic understanding of what a USP is. It can be something as simple as the experience you have, your expertise, your enlightenment, or your education. And again, these are probably things you already know. Now, it could be where you do or don't deliver your podcast. And this is going to be pretty important when you start talking about delivering a podcast on YouTube. And that's whether you're going to take an audio podcast and rebroadcast it or redirect it to YouTube, or if you're going to just add in video elements. And that's really what makes your podcast unique when you're going to put it on YouTube. It can be the kind of guest that you have, and this can be a particular niche, or just can be your style. Right? You can mix video and audio when you're doing YouTube. And you can be a segment that you do, and you want to use video to bring these particular segments to light. So in other words, you want to do specific segments, you want to have specific guests, you want to have specific demonstrations, you want to have elements where people can see you. You can use and mix in video to your podcast in order to do that, especially if you know people are going to be tuning in on YouTube. And naturally, when you're talking about something that's going to be unique, your podcast can be about a subject that isn't covered very much. And a YouTube podcast is going to be an easy way for you to talk about something that others cannot or won't talk about or demonstrate. And that's very important. The demonstration aspect is what separates YouTube from an audio podcast. So even if you are redirecting your audio podcast to YouTube, you can add in YouTube videos that will give your customer or give your viewer something different that they will be experiencing in your podcast. And of course, when you do this in the podcast space, it means that you're going to be willing basically to make sure that you are kind of out there with some ideas and that the market's going to kind of catch up with you. And the most important thing when you're podcasting is not whether or not you're going to hit a home run with every episode, or that you're going to get 10,000 downloads with the first view, with the first topic that you do, but being consistent, because eventually, if you're consistent enough, someone will discover something that you're doing, or you're just going to hit on something. And what you want to do is you just want to make sure that you're not fading out. And there's a term called podfading, where someone just gets tired, and they get tired of putting forth the effort for no apparent benefit. But you don't have to do that if you can just be consistent. And again, video gives you the opportunity to mix in a different element, for a different audience, and give you some variety in terms of what you're delivering. Now, not every subject is going to be monetizable. That's not any different than what you're experiencing, probably if you're doing an audio podcast. And you definitely want to take ideas, take polls. YouTube makes it easy for you to do that. If you're going to use the create post area, you can always use a poll from your YouTube post, and you can then basically you can do a little audience research in terms of what it is that they want. Because what's important is going to be the fact that your audience is going to come to you organically. And what you're going to do is you're going to be doing those kinds of things that your audience is going to be interested in on a regular basis. Now, if you ever want to have sponsorship, obviously you don't have to. You're going to be. It's going to be a good thing for you to have the kind of audience that will go between both video and audio. Now, you do need to make a decision about whether you're going to be primarily video or primarily audio. Now, that decision may already be made for you. If you have an existing podcast and all you're doing is directing it to YouTube, then that decision is already made. But if you have not decided yet, well, you can be primarily a video podcast, and you can then turn that audio or that video into audio and redistribute it that way. The process is slightly different. Now, if you're going to be doing a video podcast, obviously there's more to it. You've got to be presentable with every broadcast, and you've got to make sure that you've got your lighting, and you've got to have a background. You want to be kind of similar to the other podcasts in your genre, in your niche. Audio is easier. right? Because you don't have to look like anything. And really all you got to do is you got to have the equipment to record the audio. There's certainly platforms that will allow you to do that with little or no equipment. Now, YouTube people are probably going to be more willing to watch than listen. So, the fact that you're going on YouTube, you got to kind of keep that in mind, even if you're doing an audio podcast. And it's going to be harder to stand out with just audio on YouTube. Now, you can do it, obviously, if you've got great guests or you've got great topic and people are interested. People will come and they will tune into your to your content. But it's going to be harder to stand out on a video platform if you're doing audio only. You want to keep that in mind as you decide whether or not you're going to be primarily video or primarily audio. It's always going to be what makes your podcast different will be the lasting value. So even if you don't necessarily stand out, you're going to have to do the kinds of things that, again, just make your podcast totally different than anything else is on YouTube, whether you choose to use primarily video or audio. And a USP is basically, what is it about what you're doing that your visitors or your listeners, they have to have it, right? Are you doing something that is uh, that they cannot skip? They cannot skip during the week. They must tune in because you've got something that either is compelling to them, and sometimes it can be entertainment. It can be the drama that you bring to their lives, or you can bring the inspiration, or you can bring humor. You've got to be able to come up with something that your visitors or your listeners, they have to have. And whether you're doing this for business, it really does have to do with who your audience is and what they want. So if your podcast is really primarily to drive customers, then you might be able to do something like entertainment and have them buy, to drive buyers. But in general, you want to focus in on the area in some way of the product you're trying to sell. When you're doing a podcast on YouTube or otherwise. Let's talk about another fundamental marketing principle, which is upsells and cross sells. And when you are going on these platforms, you need to have a sales system. And again, this is no different on YouTube than it is. And if you're going to just use audio, you want to make sure that you are doing things like giveaways, and you've got to make sure that you know what your podcast is for. And that's really the theme of this whole session, understanding what the podcast is going to do and how you're going to structure it based on that. And if you understand what it's supposed to do, then that's how you're going to incorporate, your upsells and cross sells into the podcast. Now you can do merch, right? But generally, a podcast is going to be more profitable if what you're doing is you're using it to get interest and drive sales. And so one easy upsell to anything that you're doing is going to be a continuity program. You always want to have that. And you set your pricing based on what your marketers and your marketing listeners are telling you, right? Because, in general, they're going to tell you what it is that they're interested in. And having a podcast is a great way to do audience research. It's a great way to understand who it is that's coming to your sales page, who it is that's coming to listen and understand, because ultimately you and I are in the information business. And this is an easy transition to make when someone, if you understand what information they value from having done your podcast, that's an easy thing to figure out then what it is that they will purchase, what it is that they will buy, and how much they're willing to pay for the information that you are providing for them by way of sales. How are you going to deliver that information, right? And maybe if they're used to hearing you deliver audio, will they make a purchase? Will they buy it? Right? That's important for you to understand about your individual audience. And of course, the number one thing that you want to make sure that's connected to whatever it is you're doing is that you have a way of collecting names and email addresses, all along the way. Now let's talk about YouTube in particular. And you've got a great opportunity with YouTube that you may not have necessarily with something like an iTunes podcast, because people are trained to look in the description for links. They're predisposed to do that. And so when they're watching on YouTube, they will probably be checking that description area to try to determine where the links are that you're pointing them out to them. So you're not fighting people to get them to look at those links. You're not trying to direct them to where they have to look. They already know if they are on YouTube for any length of time. And so you want to probably do the opposite of what video creators do inside of YouTube. If you're doing this for business and you are moving some of the content onto YouTube, don't clutter up that description area with a lot of links. Especially if you're doing these episodes on a regular basis, you need to have that link of whatever it is you're talking about for them to purchase. You want to make sure it's prominent and that it is clear. And again, that doesn't mean then that you don't have multiple links, but you don't necessarily have to have all the links that you can possibly squeeze in there, especially if the point of the podcast show or the point of the episode is to get them predisposed to buy something that you are selling. And you can make people link blind when you do that. And so basically, if you have all the links, then none of the links are really going to be relevant because they're just one among a bunch of them, right? You want to make sure that you're highlighting the most important thing to them in that description area. Now, if you're going to add in a video episode, you've got to make sure that you are primarily going to have an audio podcast. Now, you can add in something if it's not going to be every episode. It's going to be every once in a while. When you do that, you got to make sure that you understand you're operating under the understanding. That the people that are listening to your podcast, if you're doing a video, you've got to assume then that these people are not going to see your podcast, right? They may not tune into the video. So when you're in that episode, you've got to be talking to people that may not see the video you're doing, right? So you still got primarily an audio podcast. You do a video in there. Well, people are not going to just automatically go and watch the video. They're going to tune in where they are used to tuning in. And so you still got to address those people as if they're listening, even if you have a video. In general, you want to make good use of your thumbnail image inside of YouTube. You got to make sure that thumbnail image, if you can, has a direct call to action. You can put the title on there. You can put the URL on there. But in general, what you want to try to do is someplace in there, you've got to give people an opportunity, even if all it is a QR code. Give people an opportunity to do something so they can take some action based on listening or watching your podcast. And you got to test out the thumbnails, right? You can test them out to see if it maximizes views. You can test out different thumbnails to see if they maximize buyers. Maybe a certain kind of podcast brings a lot of buyers. Maybe a certain kind of podcast brings a lot of opt-ins. So you got to test all of those things versus the different thumbnails you're making. Now, again, if you're doing this podcast for the sake of your business, these are things that you do want to test on a regular basis. And which one performs the best against what you're trying to accomplish with your podcast? That's the question you want to answer. And if you're going to use something like an audio stream indicator on top of the video, you've got to see what that does to your conversions. Because again, the point is not necessarily to keep people on the platform and keep people watching an audio. The point for you is going to be, well, can I drive sales? Can I get people to click over to something that I am actually selling? Can I get them to opt in to my existing presence? So we've got to convert those people from YouTube over into our presence and what it is that we're doing for our business. And so all of this, the only way you're going to be able to do any of this is if your original link, you've got to have tracking in place. So none of this is going to work. You're not going to be able to track views, buyers, or opt-ins unless you put links there that have tracking links, right? Now, I'm not saying that you have to have links there that are going to be the pixel people, right? That's not the idea, unless that is what you're doing. But you generally want to make sure that the links that you place in YouTube, that when people click them, you will be able to count where they're clicking from, and you'll be able to look at your statistics and tell who's coming from YouTube and who is not. Now, one of the most important elements to this process is, and this does come back to, you're trying to figure out what your podcast is for, because that's really going to dictate whether or not you send people from your email to your podcast on YouTube, or whether you're just going to have those people come from YouTube over to your podcast. Now, obviously, if what you're trying to do is if you're trying to get views, you're trying to get your monetization up and you've already got an email list, well, sure, then you're going to tell people in your email that, hey, I've got a new podcast episode on YouTube. You're going to send them over there. Now, in other cases, it doesn't make sense to do, because you're not necessarily going to be driving people to undistracted purchasing. So if you send people to YouTube, you are sending them to a place where they're going to see a lot of links, they're going to see a lot of different things going on. And in general, any information marketer will tell you that you're always going to be better off making a direct appeal for a purchase without any distraction. Right? That's why you send people to a sales page. It doesn't have any other links, doesn't have any other menu items. You want people focused on what it is that offer is telling them that they need to purchase. So you don't want to send people to be distracted. And if you send people over to YouTube from your email address, right, or from their email, then they're going to go and watch other videos. They could watch the videos of some of your other competition. They could watch videos that are going to be distracting to them. And that's not what you want to do if your point is to get people to purchase things. And so you might want to just consider using the YouTube podcast as a one-way traffic source, right? Maybe you don't want to send people over there. Maybe you send people to a place where they can watch or listen to the same content, but yet on your website, they're going to be undistracted, especially if what you're talking about is something they need to take action on and they're going to buy. So managing your list is going to be vital. You've got to think through these things before you just do what everyone else is doing, and that is to just send people from their email list over to their podcast. Affiliate and partner marketing is also something that you want to consider, and you want to use a video element to let viewers see your partners. And this is something that you can add. So if you're going to be doing some kind of affiliate promotion, or you're going to be doing some kind of introduction of a partner or somebody you're going to be working with, and you don't want to just bring them in and have them in front of your audience, I mean, you can actually introduce them by using video. And that's a great use of a video in terms of your podcast. And you can also use the video component to do demonstrations. Right? So if you're doing something and you're selling something that requires them to see something on screen, and they've got to see the realness of it, well, a video podcast is a great way of saying, well, hey, watch this video. Let me show you what this actually does, especially if you're going to be able to show people something on camera or on screen. And this is always, and there's no guarantee to this, right? But typically, I mean, if you can show people what they're getting, right, what they might be looking at, you're probably going to be increasing the likelihood they're going to purchase. And so this is a great way of being able to increase your conversion rate. And the other thing you want to kind of keep in mind here is that, there's always monetization associated with channels that meet certain thresholds that may or may not be what you're going for, especially if you're using YouTube for business, a business podcast. If you're trying to do monetization and work with affiliate partners, and YouTube gives you the opportunity to put products in your channel, you're probably not going to be able to have your affiliates cookied for those. So, just because it's available doesn't mean you have to use it. Doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to make it part of your business model. And so, once again, the moral of the story is, how are you going to use the podcast? Is it for traffic, or is it just for selling things? Very important distinction, very important element you have to make sure you're understanding of and that you are using in your decision making. Educational marketing can also be done with your video-based podcast. Naturally, just as you would with audio, you want to do special events, right, for your customers and for your listeners. And this is a great time for you to do a training session. Maybe there's something that they want to learn, but they've been saying they want to learn, and you can show them and teach them how to do it by using video. For example, and we talked about this before, especially if you're going to be bringing in a guest, You can show them who your guest is. You can show them a PowerPoint. You can show them something that will help them to follow the guest. You know, when someone's familiar with you and then you're going to bring on a guest, sometimes a guest may talk at a different cadence. Maybe they talk too fast. Sometimes they talk too slow. If they can use a visual, this will typically increase the opportunity that you have in order to generate sales from anything that they are presenting or that they are promoting. And of course, whenever you bring on a guest, it should be free to them, just as you would with an audio podcast, and that you want to make sure that it is enhancing your brand. Naturally, none of the guests you want to bring on, they're going to be random. You've got to get people tied back into your show and get people to your customer list. Now, this is all going to be easier to do with YouTube because, again, you're bringing on someone, and even if they don't know them, you're going to be able to get them to know your listeners, get them to know your audience. And whenever you can, even if you're an audio-based podcast, you want to put those partners on video. They're willing. And another kind of underrated sense, and if maybe you have an audio podcast, but you don't necessarily have things like customer service videos, and you can put all those videos now on your YouTube channel, right? If you're going to have a YouTube channel associated with your podcast, and maybe you're not using YouTube already, well, put those customer service videos now on your YouTube channel. That's a great place for your customers to visit. That's a great place for the people that are listening to your podcast on YouTube. Well, they can experience some of the customer service videos that you place inside of your channel. So all of your FAQs, your support videos, your customer service videos, if you can, you want to go ahead and put those on your channel. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't put them on your website. So if you've already got all of your help videos and your service videos, your support videos, you've already got those things on, on your site, then you don't want to move them, but you do want to cross-post them. You do want to make sure that they are also going to be on your YouTube channel. Let's talk about some direct response elements as we close out here. You want to use a classic direct response. Use scarcity, right? You've got to tell them that limiting the time that episodes are going to be available. And in some cases, and it's not necessarily going to be on your channel per se, but you can show them the site where they're going to have a countdown timer. And there's a difference between telling someone that an offer is going to be expiring and actually having them see a countdown timer. So when you're doing things that are going to be time limited, well, you want to try to show those things. You want to try to show them that they've only got so much time, even though you're telling them verbally. You can do that by including that in a video or including that in a video post. And some of what you're going to be putting on social media, they're going to be excerpts, right? Just as you would do with an audio podcast. And all of these things are going to require a little more work, right? So if you've got a team of people and you've got people that are working with you, they can certainly help you with some of these tasks. And naturally, you can make scarcity and urgency, right? An element. And again, we can do that with our countdown timer. We can make urgency, all right, that some things come to an end, and we can make sure that if you've got a buy button, that maybe it shows how many are going to be left. You can demonstrate, you can show those things in a video. And naturally, yes, you can take advantage of AI, when you need them. Now, here's the element that I do want to kind of speak to for more than a minute, which is you want to use this video element as social proof. Because one of the things that the audio does over time is it gives you credibility. It allows you to be places where it's hard to be with video, right? Because people can take an audio, they can take an audio podcast in places where they don't have to sit and watch. They can listen to it while they work. They can listen to it while they drive. They can listen to it while they work out. And maybe they can't all the time do that with video. And so an audio really allows you to be personal with your listeners and personal with your customer base. At the same time, it is difficult for you to prove that you're an expert. It's difficult for you to prove what it is that you are saying or that your claims are going to be true. One of the things that you can do, and if you can be effective at it, is going to be to make sure that the customer or the viewer, that they see what you're talking about. And so a video podcast on YouTube in particular gives you the opportunity to bring things to life that you cannot do with audio. So it doesn't mean that you do things that you would not do on audio, but you want to make sure you're enhancing the audio by doing something, adding elements that prove that what you're saying is going to be true, proving that your purchase or what you're selling should be something that they should go ahead and make their purchase from you in this case. And again, what do we mean by social proof? What is that? What does the social proof mean? It's really how you demonstrate and show success, right? And so one of the things that you can do with video, if you're willing, especially with live video, and you want to do this in real time, is you want to show elements of success. Whether or not you are the center of attention, right? You know, it's been said that you need a star, a story, and a solution in order to make a sale. Well, if you're the star, one of the things that you can do is you can be the star right there in real time if you're doing live, and that's something that you can do on YouTube. If you will present yourself as someone who has used what it is you're selling, someone that has benefited from what you're trying to tell people, what you're trying to give people access to, that's going to give you the kind of social proof that you cannot get elsewhere and that you cannot do effectively by audio. So a YouTube podcast gives you a very unique opportunity to seal the deal, to seal the message by showing people, well, hey, you know what? I've had success. Here it is. And however you do that, right? Whether you do that by, talking through your points, or whether you do that by showing them a physical demonstration, you can create social proof in different ways when you are in a video. And naturally, these very same things you can do in a recording, right? And you should do them. All of your recordings should have an element of social proof in them. You should have some element where you're showing people something that you maybe didn't want to demonstrate it live, but you can upload it to your YouTube channel, right? Not everything can be done live and in person, but it's still just as valid if you record a session and you upload it to your YouTube channel. And that's what you're really trying to do. Again, now if we're talking about using this podcast for business, YouTube gives us a different dimension, gives us a different element that we can add to the process in order to get people and move them into the buying process. Okay, very good. Now, are there any questions? Any questions? Any questions about using YouTube podcasting in order to effectively market your business? Any questions? Okay, so here's a question. If I don't have a podcast, is it better to start on an audio platform and then move to YouTube, or just start out on YouTube altogether? And there is an answer to that. Now, the easiest way to start podcasting is to just get a free Spotify account and then to start podcasting. And there really isn't a lot that you have to have. There isn't a lot that you have to do. You don't have to obey a schedule. And because you're not necessarily having to make some kind of monthly payment, it's going to be the best way for you to start out, even easier than doing YouTube. And so the reason for this is because you don't need equipment. And so you don't have to be presentable. So you don't have to be on camera. And you don't necessarily have to do video for YouTube, but at some point you're going to want to show up there. So the best place to start out is going to be to start out on audio. And then it's going to also be the most cost effective. For Spotify, you probably need a headset, probably the mic. You may need to be able to just talk into your computer. Some people talk directly into your audio. And then you're going to take that podcast feed and just attach it to YouTube. And so that's always going to be easier than anything else you're going to do in terms of starting. Now, one thing you could do is you could just record the audio. And so if you have a program like Audacity, you have something like Camtasia, you could just record the audio yourself. You could edit it, and then you can add in some extras and then upload it to YouTube. But the thing about doing those kinds of things is that they require an extra step. And anytime you have an extra step, that's just enough sometimes when you're first starting out to keep you from podcasting. And so The best thing is always going to be, if you haven't done anything podcasting, is going to be to start out on a really easy platform that's easy to get going and easy for you to create an episode on a regular basis. I see there's discussion online about using AI. Should this be avoided? And this is a question that is going to be debated at all points in time. And right now, and you're using a big platform like YouTube or Spotify, it's detectable. So if you put AI into anything, especially audio, these big platforms are going to know it, and the question is going to be whether or not you feel like you should be using it and the platform feels like they're using it. And right now, there is a position that the platforms are taking. YouTube has said they're going to differentiate. And so they're not all in on you using AI for content right now. So they're saying that you can, they're not going to prevent you, but they definitely want to make sure that they tell the viewers or the listeners that this is AI. So when you start thinking about this, when you start thinking that you're going to have your podcast on YouTube, the single most conservative thing to do is going to be to create the content yourself. And at this point, AI is not necessarily part of the regular podcaster's toolbox in terms of creating content. Now, you one alternative that you have is that when you do live training, let's say that you do something on Zoom or you do something on YouTube Live, you can always take the video and strip out the audio, and you can use that as your podcast. So there are some alternatives to being able to create content, and certainly if you're creating yourself, there's a way to work around or not having to use AI in order to do it. Now, in terms of your actual script and outline, that is a place for AI. So if you're trying to figure out how to structure what you're going to say, or maybe how to structure your questions or what questions you ask for a guest, that's a good thing to use AI to do. And AI can help you to do those things. Another thing is to do research. And so maybe, doing a regular search engine doesn't necessarily put it into a format that you can use on the podcast. That's a very good place for you to use AI and to make it part of the way that you do podcasts, and then to make it an element that works to make you more efficient. And naturally, you always want to look for ways in your process, ways you can make your job easier as a podcaster. So anytime you're doing podcasting of any kind, then think about all the things you do to produce your podcast. Think about all the ways that you promote your podcast. When you think of all those things, you're probably going to have a number of tasks. And likely, other than content creation, they're going to be a good 75 to 80% of everything you do.
Ready to take your podcast to the next level? Remember, success starts with consistency, creativity, and delivering value your audience can't ignore. Don't wait. Start building your unique voice today. Follow for more tips and strategies to grow your podcast.